Welcome back to the Nautilus Files. In this episode, we're going to talk about Severance, specifically the MDR crew. Now, I was going to put this video out about 2 weeks ago, and I had completely done the outline, performed it and everything, recorded it, and started editing. I had only written about Mark. I realized, no, we should cover the entire MDR department because they're all interesting characters. So let's do that instead. Now, before we begin, as usual, you know the deal. There's going to be spoilers all over this bad boy. So you've been warned. Make sure that if you have not seen the show and you don't want it to be ruined, watch the show first and come back and watch my video. Promise you this is a great show. You won't be disappointed. So, Severance. Ben Stiller. What the F? This is a comic writer. I didn't think the show was going to be good. In fact, I thought it...
Well, it sucks.
Turns out it's really good. It's kind of like a Black Mirror episode, but it's been turned into an entire series. It's got a little bit of Eternal Sunshine in there. It's quite good. It may even be one of the best sci-fi series since The Expanse. Just my opinion. So let's talk about Mark. Now, Mark is the main character in Severance. He's the character we learn the most about because he's the only member of the severed MDR crew whose Audi's life is known to the audience. With the other members, we're only given breadcrumbs. They're drip fed to us over the course of the season. So I'll talk about them a little later in the video, but for now, let's focus on the main character, Mark. Very early on, we learned that Mark is suffering from some major emotional trauma, and this is evident in a few ways. We see him crying in his car in the Lumen parking lot before heading into the building. A few minutes later, he enters the building. It's only when the elevator door is about to open that we're able to witness the transformation into a severed Lumen employee. One of the things I noticed too was when he's walking down the hallway and he throws out his tissue that he was using to ball into when he was in the parking lot. I thought that was a good symbolism, like he's kind of throwing away the old personality, the person he was outside. He doesn't even know he was crying, so he wouldn't even remember what that tissue was there for. When Audi Mark is at home, he drinks like a fish. He downs bottles of wine like it's nothing. He seems to live a life free of any friendly attachments. His house is dimly lit and it carries a distinct gloomy atmosphere. There's no doubt that this matches what's going on inside, his internal conflict. Mark has isolated himself from the world to cope with his depressive state, and he finds escape in the bottle. In episode 1, Mark's sister remarks,
I just feel like forgetting about her for 8 hours a day isn't the same thing as healing.
Severance is not a replacement for healing. This is her way of saying that what Mark is doing is not working. Mark is stagnating, wallowing in his self-misery over the loss of his wife in a supposed car crash. He appears to be stuck in a perpetual state of mourning. Mark probably had such a hard time getting on with his life after this, that the idea of severing or splitting his life into a work life and an outside life seemed like a good idea. After all, at least he could function normally at work without having to remember what happened and avoid the burden of trying to pretend he's okay while he's at work. Mark seems to have a great relationship with his sister, and he seems like a good brother, but despite her efforts to help him, Mark doesn't want to be helped. He's not really interested in moving on with his life, at least from an emotional standpoint. And this is where PD comes in. Mark's Innie's best friend at Lumen. It's gonna take me a while to get used to referring to them as Innies and Outies, but it's the best term. I mean, it really is. It's perfect. Anyway, PD is a former employee of Lumen who was severed, and he escapes. As a result of him escaping, the process of undoing a severance did a number on his brain, and he's not handling things well. He's not doing so hot. Mark knows PD is a friend, but of course he has no recollection of their time together at Lumen. Even so, Mark does everything he can to help PD, including letting him hide out in his home. And we know that this is something that is extremely dangerous, but it shows you what kind of person Mark is. Mark is always going to stand up and help anyone who's in need. It's his nature. This is the way he is inside and outside. It shows you his core personality remains the same. PD is the catalyst that starts Mark's change from being passive about his situation to actually wanting to do something about it. It all starts when PD makes Marky's.
You feel it, baby?
It all starts when PD makes Mark's Audi question what is happening at Lumen. And he implies that whatever it is that's happening is sinister in nature. Mark watches his best friend fall apart right before his eyes. And this is what causes him to finally start thinking, maybe the whole Lumen thing wasn't such a good idea. Because Mark is more of an easygoing personality, he doesn't really like conflict. He's not normally inclined to go against authority or to question things. We see this in the way that he reacts to Helly's situation at work. We also see it in the way that he lets his boss treat him. I mean, come on, who puts up with that? And then there's the whole garbage disposal issue with Koble. I mean, obviously Koble set up that whole situation so she could keep an eye on him, and she's really not supposed to be doing this anyway. But Mark is super nice about the situation, where most people would have been a lot more irritated and would have probably responded in an unkind manner. So let's talk about what happens when Mark wakes up on the outside. Mark's innie becomes an outie, I think. I don't know, that's confusing. Mark's innie wakes up outside and he finds himself at a reading of his brother-in-law's new book. At this reading is his sister, who he doesn't even recognize. Once he realizes that she is his sister, he decides that he'll approach her with the truth and seek her assistance. Unfortunately, Koble is also at the event, keeping tabs on him, no doubt. Koble suspects something is up and figures out that the version of Mark that she's looking at is actually the severed inside version, and immediately seeks to sound the alarm. She freaks out, she calls Milchick, and of course Milchick makes a beeline for the control room where Dylan is holding down the fort. Milchick tries everything he can to try to dissuade Dylan from keeping his colleagues in outie mode while he tries to break into the blockade. So ultimately we see that Mark's character, his compassion, his kindness, his empathy doesn't change whether he's inside or outside. And I think what that speaks to is the idea that we are who we are. If you are a kind person, you'll be a kind person. Even if you lost all your memory and started over, there are aspects of you that will not change. Now let's talk about the other members of the MDR crew. Macro, Data, Refinement. Helly is the complete opposite of Mark in a lot of ways. Maybe that's where the attraction comes from. I'm not sure. Either way, Helly could be described as headstrong, determined, firebrand. No matter how you slice it though, she's very, very stubborn. She doesn't take kindly to her situation at Lumen, and she's no doubt confused as to why she wakes up in a conference room on a table. But her response?
Ow!
Well, Helly wakes up and chooses violence. Helly makes up her mind very early on that she's gonna leave Lumen, and she's gonna do it no matter what Lumen does to try to stop her. Lumen puts her in the so-called break room to try to break her spirit, but she never gives in, even when pushed to her psychological limit. Helly's choices exhibit a consistent intractability. She won't be controlled or coerced into doing anything she doesn't want to do. We can see this in her persistent efforts to escape Lumen, going from a respectful request to quit to actually trying to end her life just to get out of the contract. When she gets the video of her outie basically telling her that she's never gonna let her out, Helly is shocked by how cold her alternate is. Looking back on that now, it makes perfect sense. Her outie basically tells her that she's not a person and that there's no way she'll ever let her out. That whole scene was kind of fascinating to me because the dogmatic personality that is driving her to escape is the same dogmatic personality that's keeping her inside. Oh, the irony. Helly's base personality exists in both of her severed halves, proving that a severed person's core spirit doesn't change even if they are reborn with zero memory of their past life. Again, you are who you are. In the season finale, we learn that Helly is not like the other members of MDR. Side note, up until the final episode, I kept wondering why Milchick kept taking so many photos of her, and why Koble kept putting up with such blatant insubordination. But this explains it. Helly is very different from the others. She actually volunteered to be severed as part of a political scheme to help Lumen normalize and mainstream the severance process. They wanted to make it legit and go public. She did this because she is directly related to Kier Egan and seemingly believes in the project. Either that or she just really wanted to make Daddy happy. When Helly's innie realizes her true identity, she's mortified, but she sees an opportunity to really hurt Lumen and she decides to go for it anyway. Whether or not she's successful, well, that remains to be seen. We'll talk about that in season 2. Enter Dylan. Dylan is one of my favorite characters. He may be my favorite character. I wish there was more Dylan on the show. Dylan is closer to Helly in personality than anyone else. We don't know much about him beyond his severed personality. But by the second half of the season, the writers begin to let us in a little bit more as to what he's about. He's very intelligent, witty, snarky, and brutally honest. The man knows not the meaning of subtlety. And that's probably why he's so comically charged as a character on the show. Dylan is motivated to work at Lumen by sheer desire to excel, so that he can receive rewards, quote unquote, for his efforts. Dylan shows up every day with the goal of outperforming his coworkers, and he's not shy about rubbing it in their faces. He appears to only have a casual interest in what his life is like outside of Lumen, and I find it funny how he fancies himself to be some kind of cool guy outside of work. I wondered if Dylan would ever question his existence in Lumen had he not been accidentally given the knowledge of the fact that he has a son on the outside. Dylan read the illegal book in secret, and that may have been the start of things for him. He really flips a switch when he learns about his son, though. The idea that he'll never know his name, let alone get to know his son, ends up being too much for him. There's a scene where Milchick is dancing in celebration of Helly's success. Probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole show because Milchick's dancing is incredible. I wish I could dance like that. In that scene, we watch Dylan try to hold it together as Milchick's dancing around him, and he just snaps. He just loses it. It's hilarious, but it's also kind of sad at the same time. But let's be real, Milchick deserved that. Dylan volunteers to be the one to stay behind. He sacrifices the opportunity to learn more about his Audi's life in the immediate for the possibility of getting the entire MDR crew out of the trap that is their jobs. He knows that they will eventually be caught, but he will most likely face the consequences first. This is a testament to his courage. Now, we don't know what he's like outside of work. I would imagine these qualities remain the same. Once Kobo reveals the game is up, Milchick seeks out Dylan to stop the program. Dylan, of course, does not make that easy for him. This is another scene that I thought was hilarious.
Dylan! I know you're in there, Dylan. Open the door! You, Mr. Milchick! Dylan!
I thought it was funny that Milchick tries to persuade him to open the door with waffle parties and other stupid gifts, because in the past, that's all it would have taken. But Dylan is a different person now. He's driven by the need to see his son, and nothing is going to stop him. I hope that season 2 gives us more Dylan, helping us to complete the picture of who he is outside of Lumen's walls. Last, but certainly not least, let's talk about Irving. Irving is a man of the culture. Truly, I mean that unironically. Irving is the quintessential Renaissance man. He's articulate, diplomatic, measured, and very observant. Irving is all about Lumen, though. He's deeply bought into the mythology and legacy of Lumen and sees Kier as almost a god. He's not far off from Kobo in the level of fanaticism and loyalty, but this all changes when Irving meets another severed coworker named Bert. The experience of finding that level of intimacy with another person within the walls of Lumen and then have it ripped away when Bert is conveniently forced into an early retirement sparks a deep-seated rage in Irving. This is when his entire worldview is upended, and he settles on the opinion that the MDR crew totally needs to...
Let's burn this place to the ground.
When he awakens outside, Irving is revealed to be obsessed with painting the break room hallway in Lumen. This is something he should not be consciously aware of, but his subconscious apparently has held on to that, showing that the severed personalities cannot escape a shared subconscious. This is why he has these hallucinated episodes. He sees this melty black goo dripping everywhere in the office. This is another case of his subconscious spilling through both halves of his severed life. When we get to see Irving wake up inside his apartment, standing in a room full of paintings of the break room hallway, Irving makes out a few things about his outside life. He is ex-military, he's a prolific painter, but most importantly, he's been doing some investigating of his own about Lumen and its employees, most notably Bert. This implies that he may have somehow subconsciously known Bert while he was inside. Irving makes finding Bert his sole concern while being out. Not knowing how much time he has and having to drive a car for the first time in his life, he makes his way to Bert's home, only to find Bert, his partner, inside. Rather than walking away from it all, Irving bangs on the door. He wants to talk to Bert. This may be the only chance he ever gets. We don't get to see if he gets to speak to Bert before his Audi takes back control. I would assume, though, that he doesn't. I think it's likely that Bert opens the door right after the Audi takes control, or the innie goes back to sleep. Irving seems to be a lonely person outside of Lumen, though, and I'm not sure why that's the case, but you get the same sense of emptiness from Irving that you do from Mark. Perhaps the need for companionship that drove Irving's innie to revolt is also what is motivating his outside personality. Here's to getting more Irving backstory in season 2. So that's it for this season 1 assessment of Severance and the MDR crew. I'll make another one of these videos when season 2 is out and I've completely watched it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, I would have released this more than a week ago, but I decided to rewrite it. If you did enjoy this video though, you know what to do. As always, have a good one, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.